Hello, and welcome to this video that gives an overview of corpus-based linguistic typology. I'll start by explaining what that is. So, what is corpus-based linguistic typology? First of all, I'm not trying to plagiarize this article by Dirk Goldhaan and colleagues called Corpus-based linguistic typology, a comprehensive approach. It just so happens that I find corpus-based typology the right term for pulling together a body of research that uses multilingual corpora to answer questions about cross-linguistic generalizations. To refresh your memory, linguistic typology is the systematic study, comparison, and classification of language structures being specific constructions that we can define across languages, such as the size of the consonant inventory, systems of number marking, or basic word order. Typologists commonly make use of three data sources: reference grammars, texts, and elicitation. Reference grammars are comprehensive works on the structure of a particular language. They are often written by either native speakers or field workers that are also linguists. Hence, they are usually written by experts on the language of study. Most descriptive grammars contain information about the same constructions and are organized along the same lines, which means that during typological data gathering, the typologist will learn where to look, which helps them gather data in a systematic way. Alongside reference grammars, typologists also use texts to gather data. An example is included on the right. The word text does not include only written down texts, but also longer passages of spoken language that have been transcribed and that can be accessed either publicly or after asking for permission. Some reference grammars, like the example on the right from Claire Bowen's Grammar of Bardi, include smaller or bigger text collections. And of course, text collections can also appear as books by themselves. The third option that typologists have is elicitation, asking native speakers or experts specific questions about the topic of investigation. The picture at the bottom left corner shows how this may look in the field, but much contact with experts and native speakers, especially those that are not in the typologist's vicinity, can also take place over the internet. Very often, to gather as much data as possible, linguists or typologists will consider data from all these three sources for a single study. We can contrast these traditional data sources with those used in corpus-based linguistic typology, and as such come to a definition. Corpus-based linguistic typology is typology being done primarily with data from multilingual corpora. To clarify, with cross-linguistic here, I mean that one studies a sizable set of languages, sampled from around the world or within a particular language family, and not one or two or three languages. What might be reasons for using corpora to gather data? One of the primary reasons could be that you are somehow concerned with the frequency of the object of study. For instance, take question marking strategies. We know that many languages use a rising intonation or another special intonation pattern to mark questions, but often languages also use other strategies, such as question particles. Using a corpus of spoken language data, we could answer the question of how frequently each strategy is used. Or you could be interested in factors that explain distributions. Take again the study on question marking strategies. Using corpora, we could ask if the distribution of strategy usage can be explained by all kinds of linguistic and social linguistic variables. For instance, we could ask if, across languages, women or men rely more on intonation or more on other strategies. And the third possible reason is that your topic of study is rare or otherwise underrepresented in grammars and hardly ever shows up in short text collections. Hence, using corpora could be the only way of getting data. The large majority of corpus linguistics is devoted to monolingual studies, using monolingual corpora that contain data from a single language, and also bilateral corpora featuring a pair of languages, which are very important for natural language processing purposes. But there is also a significant body of research that uses multilingual corpora for large-scale language comparison and for testing the kind of linguistic generalizations that linguistic typologists want to test. One early and famous example of this is Greenberg's study of morphological typology from 1960, where he devised 10 measures to characterize the morphological character of 8 different languages on the basis of passages of 100 words from each language. Nowadays, we no longer have to restrict ourselves to such small data sets that are painstakingly annotated by hand, as computers enable us to conduct automatic or semi-automatic analysis of part of speech tagging, syntactic dependencies, conversational annotation, and many other types of annotation. In this video, I would like to introduce several large multilingual corpora that can be exploited for cross-linguistic research, primarily typological work, but of course, large-scale corpus-based comparative research can also be conducted from the perspective of psycholinguistics, historical linguistics, language acquisition, and other disciplines of linguistics. Let's first have a look at the different types of corpora that we may distinguish. The first distinction that we can make in the type of corpus deals with the modality of language data that it contains. Hence, there is a contrast between speech corpora or spoken corpora on the one side and text corpora, which contain written language, on the other side. There are far more text corpora than there are spoken corpora, as collecting and transcribing spoken language is far more expensive than collecting written data. In the following, I use the word text to cover both written language and spoken language, and thus I don't care very much about this particular distinction. A monolingual corpus is a collection of texts in a single language. Many of the well-known national corpora of various European languages belong to this type. A diachronic corpus is a collection of texts from a single language, where the texts are taken from the different periods in which it was spoken. I put single language in brackets because, of course, one can argue if diachronic data all comes from a single language or rather from multiple historical related languages if the time frame is big enough. There are several historical corpora of English, for instance, which cover Middle and Modern English. Then we come to multilingual corpora. A parallel corpus is a collection of texts, all of which are translated into one or more other languages. The most exciting parallel corpora for linguistic typology are, of course, those that contain translations in a great variety of languages, both from a genealogical and geographical perspective. A subtype of the parallel corpus is what I have called here the bilateral parallel corpus, which are corpora of language pairs, such as English-Spanish or Japanese-Chinese. There are a lot of corpora that, like this, and they are frequently used for natural language processing, but they're not so interesting for typologists as they deal with only 2 languages. And then lastly, there are comparable corpora. These are collections of texts which are all similar or comparable along some dimension, and of course again the texts are in more than one language. Some comparable corpora are more comparable than others. Various comparable corpora, for instance, contain news stories in different languages. These can be considered to have a semantic match in the form of the event in the real world that the news stories describe. Another example would be a collection of oral histories in various languages, which may diverge quite a lot in terms of content. In this video, I will focus only on parallel and comparable corpora, which contain a sizable amount of languages, either from a global perspective or from a language family perspective. And we will start with parallel corpora. The first of the parallel corpora is a very famous one, Europarl. This corpus contains proceedings from the European Parliament. It only contains European languages, obviously, most of which are related in the European languages, and hence it's not usable if you aim for a sample of worldwide typological diversity. However, it's widely used and famous because of machine translation tools and other NLP work. It's also one of the oldest parallel corpora available, and it has been used in typological papers, as we will see shortly. This is a useful paper by Bruno Cartoni and colleagues on using the Europarl corpus for cross-linguistic research, in case you would be interested in using it for your own research. Another famous corpus, which is much bigger in terms of the amount of languages that are covered, is the massively parallel Bible corpus. This corpus now contains over 1,800 Bibles in approximately 1,600 languages spoken all over all around the globe. It's being maintained by Michael Chisau and lives on GitHub. As an example of a study that uses the massively parallel Bible corpus, but also Europarl and a corpus containing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in over 300 languages, here is a study by Chris Benz and colleagues from 2017 on the entropy of words. Among other things, this study shows that the average information content of unigrams, so of single words, across more than 1,200 languages is very similar. The authors claim that this is due to universal patterns regarding the forces that shape our lexicons. The lexicon cannot have a vast number of words of equal probability, as such a lexicon would be unlearnable, nor can a language have a very small lexicon, as it would lack expressivity. So this is just one example, and there will be more examples later on. A typologist that has worked extensively with a massively parallel Bible corpus that he maintains himself is Bernard Welchli. Using his parallel Bible corpus that has become bigger and bigger over the years, he has worked on various typological questions, including on source and goal encoding, motion events, gender marking, and more. To go back to the overview of parallel corpora, there are other corpora available that contain religious texts in many different languages. This is a recent one. This is the JW300 corpus, and it contains parallel texts for over 300 languages taken from the websites of the Jehovah Witnesses, mostly from two magazines called Awake and Watchtower. And then there is Opus, a collection of parallel corpora based on translated texts from the internet. Some of the corpora I just mentioned, such as Europarl and JW300, are also part of the Opus. Some interesting other corpora that you can find here are the Open Subtitles corpus with translations of subtitles in over 50 languages, and the EU Bookshop corpus with various documents from the EU in almost 50 languages. And to round off the section on parallel corpora, here is a short list of some other parallel corpora that are interesting to typologists. There is the Global Voices parallel corpus, which contains news stories from the website Global Voices. There is Intercorp, a parallel text corpus based around Czech but including many more languages. Then we have Parasol, a parallel text corpus focusing on Slavic languages but containing many non-Slavic European languages. And also Party, a parallel corpus of subtitles, which is particularly relevant for typologists because movies typically feature more dialogue than prose, and hence subtitles are interesting for investigating spoken language. And lastly, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in many different languages of the world. This is only a short text, but it might still be interesting depending on your purpose. There are of course also a lot of ad hoc parallel corpora that are built for particular studies but that are never made public, and some of my own work is included here. Here we find some lexical typology work on motion events, on demonstratives, but also more core typological work on possession, tense and aspect, and commitatives. Let's now have a look at some comparable corpora. Universal Dependencies is a project that aims to develop cross-linguistically consistent treebank annotation for many languages. Treebanks are parsed text corpora that include syntactic information in the form of phrase or dependency structure grammar. The Universal Dependencies project contains two things: parsing tools for parsing your own multilingual corpus and thus getting part of speech tags and syntactic dependencies for your own corpus. And secondly, it contains treebanks in which this information has been added with some form of human input. The latter are highly annotated corpora in a large range of different languages, with at least some cross-linguistic consistency in annotation. How comparable the corpora really are in terms of content remains to be seen, but news articles are a very common source of material across languages, so one might simply select only those parts. Then the Leipzig Corpora collection. This takes the shape of a set of online dictionaries, but these are heavily corpus-based. If you search for a word in any of the 250 languages included, you can choose to see up to 100 instances of the word used within context. You can also download the corpora on which these dictionaries are based on the download page. The source data are mostly newspaper texts, or texts randomly collected from the internet. This recent paper by Natalia Levshina from 2019 makes use of both the Universal Dependencies Project and of the Leipzig Corpora collection. It investigates word order variability in a large sample of languages and shows that there are very interesting patterns in the entropy of various word orders. This is something that only can be measured using a corpus-based or token-based approach. Then, multicast, the multilingual corpus of annotated spoken texts. This is a collection of spoken language corpora from a typologically diverse set of languages. Right now it includes 12 languages, mostly Eurasian and Austronesian. The creators aim for comparative annotation across corpora, which makes them accessible for typologists and very interesting because they provide public access to spoken language data. A famous paper featuring multicast and several other spoken corpora is this paper by Jeffrey Haig and Stefan Schnell from 2016, which investigates ergativity in discourse. This was an earlier finding that intransitive subjects and transitive objects are often lexicalized full noun phrases, while transitive subjects are not used in that way. The proposed reasons for this constellation is that intransitive subjects and transitive objects are often used to introduce new reference in discourse, while transitive subjects are not used in that way. Haig and Schnell find very little evidence for this hypothesis in their 15 typologically diverse languages. And the figure shows, for example, this is one of the measures that they looked at, the percentage of full noun phrases for transitive subjects, intransitive subjects, and transitive objects, respectively, showing that these three roles are quite different in this respect. Another recent paper that uses spoken corpora to investigate the kind of properties which can only be investigated using spoken corpus data is this paper by Frank Seifert and colleagues from 2018. They use spoken corpora for 9 diverse languages from over the globe and find that there is a significant slowing down of speech before nouns as compared with verbs. They use 2 variables they measure directly from the corpora, the speed of articulation and the amount of pauses. They find an effect of slowing down before nouns across all 9 languages and attribute the slowdown effect to the larger amount of planning needed for nouns as compared with verbs. And here is a short list of some other comparable corpora and treebanks that are interesting for typologists. Hamlet is a compilation of 42 treebanks in different languages, transformed to all have the same annotation style. Then, Google Books Ngrams makes use of the immense Google Books corpus to give users information on word frequencies. The language sample is not very varied, it only contains a few big languages, but this may change in the future. Also, Pro-Eel as well as Torot and Iswok are treebanks of ancient and old Indo-European languages. I am listing here as well 2 archives that contain a large amount of corpora, especially for endangered languages that could be part of comparative research, which are probably, they're really not annotated in the same way. However, they deserve to be listed here. The first is the Dobie's archive hosted at the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics, and the second is the Hamburg Center for Language Corpora, which contains corpora for several smaller languages. By way of finishing this video, a short summary. There are many multilingual corpora available for typologists to conduct research with. These have already been used for a wide range of topics that I've tried to exemplify here, including motion events, speech rates, information content, possession, word order, argument realization, and of course many more that I haven't covered here. As pointed out by Natalia Levshina in her paper on token-based typology, using corpora to do typology enables us to have a different approach to the measures we take and the questions we ask in typology. We can quantify variability by looking at frequencies and distributions, include social linguistic information, and incorporate spoken language and sign languages to a far greater extent than has been usual. I hope that the rise in resources that has become recently available will continue, and I hope that this lecture was of use to you. I'm happy to make these slides available to you. You should be able to find my email address online. Ciao!